5 in the book, and there's a chart there which covers a lot of information. And we'll get through the grand principles. Some of this we catch back up with later. Some aspects of it you may spend a very getting a grip on. But basically, every traditional system of medicine that I've looked at has what they call their cosmology. And it's basically where everything comes from. It's usually one plan, one model, a simple model, where all the major concepts are placed. Map of the universe, if you will, the cosmos. This is the cosmology of Ayurveda. Okay. Chart's divided into 2 parts. There's a dotted line across the middle of the page, but everything above that is pre-incarnation, primordial, pre-incarnation. Everything below that is post-incarnation, post-iteration. And so we'll start at the very top and we'll try and work our way down the page as we go, if you just follow along looking at the chart. All right, at the very top it says cosmos equals principles of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. One of the things that I found really helpful for me when I was trying to really master various systems, this helped immensely with traditional Chinese medicine, for example. And it's been very helpful for me in my study of Ayurveda also, is that these traditional cosmologies are based on a numerology. They're based on a numbering system. And that the primary concepts essentially have a number that's associated with them. And that number, in a way, gives you a branch of the tree or a place to hang things. Okay? So, for example, if you can count to 10, you can learn everything there is to know about traditional Chinese medicine. And so, for example, in another text, I have a chart just like this, which is the complete cosmology of traditional Chinese medicine. And all you have to do is be able to count to 10, or actually, more correctly, count to 12. If you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you can actually learn all the fundamental principles of Chinese medicine because they are arranged according to a numerological hierarchy. All right? And as I studied the Ayurveda, I saw that Ayurveda also has this kind of organization, and so it helps with your memory, so to speak. Before number 1, well, first of all, the title of the chart is Samkhya Creation Principles. Samkhya is a Thai word, which is the same as Satkhya. So if we were doing classic or traditional Ayurveda, we'd say Satkhya Creation Principles, or in Thai, Samkhya. The word Sat is the word truth, and Kya is to know. Okay? So Satkhya is really 2 words. It means simply to know the truth. But it's the truth about, in this context, where everything comes from and how everything relates to everything else. Now, before 0, or maybe what is 0, on my chart at the very top, I put a little infinity symbol. I'm not sure if that's on yours or not. Yours might be updated. But if there's not, under Samkhya Creation Principles at the top, draw a little infinity circle. Because that is actually the origin of the cosmos. That is, by definition, as far back as back goes. That is, by definition, the origin of things before there are things to originate. And it is the same place as just before the Big Bang. Okay, so the idea is that reality, consciousness, manifestation, diversity, multiplicity, infinite varietal expression of all of these things, both energetic and material, are just not there. There's this place where they're not there. And in traditional Vedic literature, that space is the clear mind of God. Okay? But I think of it like this. So we have a space where there was this possibility of consciousness, this possibility of manifestation, but it hasn't happened yet for whatever reason. So I think of God rumbling around alone in the house of possibility. Okay? And one day, as God ambles around the house of possibility within the mindless emptiness of God's nothingness, because there is nothing to contemplate at this point, God walks in front of a mirror. And in the moment that God walks in front of the mirror, something happens, something changes in the universe. Now maybe that mirror was some aspect of undefined God consciousness, but God walks in front of a mirror. In Vedic literature, it says Brahma had a dream. Okay? But what happens is God becomes self-reflective. And in that moment, all the possibility of all that there is becomes manifest in that moment. That's the moment that we might refer to as the Big Bang. And Big Bang is just a theory. I'm just using it as a metaphor. Because previous to this self-reflective moment, there's nothing to reflect. There's only infinitely none or infinitely one. But then something changes, and the primordial consciousness becomes self-reflective. And in that moment, there is now in the world, in the universe, God and not God. Or God and God too. Or other God. There's this God and that one. And then there's interaction between the self-reflective consciousness and the original primordial consciousness. And lo and behold, first of all, the whole possibility of the universe changed the second God walked in front of that mirror or became self-reflective. That is the Big Bang. But in the next moment, those two parts interact with each other. And they create something further. Something that is different from the original primordial consciousness, and something that's different from the reflective self-consciousness. Something new. Something new happens. So we refer to that first place as first force, and that self-reflective consciousness as second force, and that which is the derivative of those two things is third force. And that's the origin of three, of the law of three. So first we have the infinity symbol, and then we have one. Okay, so that is, in Chinese medicine, that is the Tao, singular, the Tao. Okay? But then the Tao turns on itself. I mean, the Nanjing and the Neijing, two different books, have slightly different wording about how they say this, and the Tao Te Ching has slightly different wording than how this is said. But essentially, the primordial, original, all that there is, becomes self-reflective, and then becomes consumed with the reflection. And in that moment, generates the third force, which is that which is the progeny of the first two. First force is male, second force is female. Third force is both male and female. You could say mother, father, father, mother, child, for example. That's a perfect example of this cosmos. One of the definitions of the word cosmos, and why the word cosmosis and cosmos is actually used, is the dictionary definition of a cosmos is something that within itself has everything it needs to replicate and continue its existence in perpetuity. It's all there. Everything is there to both to survive, if you will, or to be, and then within the context of that, it has everything it needs to continue infinitely. So we have what we call the family. The family is a cosmos. If you have a male, a female, and a child, or at least if you have the paternal contribution of sperm and the maternal contribution of egg, you may produce a child, and out of that child you may produce an infinite number of future generations, which are knockoffs of the old block. And this is how the universe is created, from one into infinity of infinite multiplicity and infinite expression of diversity ad infinitum energy and all the continuums that exist. So when God becomes self-reflective, that you have an active part and you have a receptive part. So you have a male part and you have a female part, and that's where two comes in. Now in Thai, the male or yang part is called Purusha. Purusha. Okay, sorry, Nama. Purusha is the Sanskrit word. So the male or the primordial male or primordial patriarchal influence is called Purusha. This is also exemplified in the icon of Shiva. In Thai, we call this Nama. Nama. So if you look at teachings on Vipassana Bhavana, it talks about the reconciliation of Nama and Rupa as an objective of the meditation. Well, that means a balancing or harmonizing of the male and female parts. That's what that means. Of the light and the dark parts, the extrovert and the introverted parts, the inside with the outside, and so on and so forth. But Shiva is, I want to be clear about how I say this. Ayurveda comes from classical Hindu tradition, from the Vedantas, and so there's numerous references to deities, male deities and female deities and gods and goddesses and all this kind of thing. And in the past, that's been a real impediment for some students. It's been a real impediment. Like, well, I don't want to learn about Shiva. I don't want to learn about, Shakti or Brahma or Kali or anybody else. I'm a this or that. I don't believe in those things. Okay. Let's just think of it from, if you want to say, a cultural philosophical viewpoint, that there's another way that you can look at these deities, and that is the deities are icons for the archetype of what they are trying to communicate with this knowledge. So let's say we go back in history to a time when there's no books, there's no written material, but I know this. I know that about the archetype of the male, primordial male. I know about the archetype of the primordial female. I know about the universal archetype of progeny and of derivative and of hierarchies of energy. I know about this. How do I communicate that? And so, well, they made an image that incorporated all the different aspects that they were trying to communicate. Today, we would just write a book, make a DVD or something. We just write a book, make a documentary, do something like that. But in the past, when there was no such thing, and there was this urge to communicate, pass on to subsequent generations this information, what did they have to do it with? They had wood and they had stone and they had water and they had minerals, and so they could carve and they could shape and they could make paint, even going back 40,000 years. They could do that. And so that's what they did. Some of the archetypes were directly from nature, and they were archetypes of animals. Archetypes of animals. And we know that that's the oldest known indications of organized human art and communication, that there are the figures of animals. But there are also body parts that are also there, like handprints. So you have a buffalo and a handprint. Okay? And we don't necessarily know exactly how to interpret those symbols because they're so proto-civilization that we're not quite sure what the context of life that the artist was in, but we know that these records exist. And then later, as we get into the first civilizations of Sumer, and Ayurvedic culture is the derivative of the great Sumerian culture. You want to follow the path of how we get to Indian culture. It starts with Sumer, then it goes to Babylon. Then you have the derivatives of the Chaldeans, the Aramaics, the Abyssinians, etc. Okay? And then you have the Babylonians and the Persians, and you have a divergent branch from the Sumerian, Chaldean, Abyssinians, who go north and west until they travel to the Indus Valley and then south into Mesopotamia and out of Mesopotamia to Africa, India, and so on. And they were great, fabulous, well-defined cultures 4, 5, 6,000 years before there ever was an Indian culture. So if you look at the time frame of when these cultures existed, they predate the Indus culture by 3, 4, 5, 6,000 years. And they were great cultures with intact philosophies and whole systems of medicine and social sciences and politics and religion and all that, which predate the Indian culture, and some of their ideals traveled with them. And we see these kinds of expressions of this numerology and so on, even in those cultures. Pretty much like I'm giving it to you now. Father principle number 1. Okay. On the right-hand side, we see Prakruti, which in Thai is Rupa, and this is the Shakti principle. So when we think about the deities, when from now on, when you look at a statue or an image or a picture of Shiva, okay, instead of looking at it as some god to worship or to venerate, which I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but instead of doing that, I'm saying, read about who was Shiva. What was Shiva's role in creation? Who was Shiva in the cast of players? What was the role? What is the archetype of Shiva? And then this quality of the latent possibility of manifestation in consciousness that is the Shiva principle or the Purusha principle will be more clear. The male principle, the yang principle. All right, then let's look at Prakruti. Now we're on the female side of the equation. Okay, the feminine, yang, Shakti principle, Thai, say Rupa, or the Divine Mother. Now the Purusha principle, the Divine Father, is the witness. The witness. Okay? And the Mother is the Divine Mother. And they have two different qualities about them. One is latent possibility on the male side and manifest possibility on the female side. So we say that the Purusha principle is without attributes, energy, formless, passive, pure existence. That's a primordial being, but without doing. Doing comes in with the Divine Mother, which is the creative force of action with attributes, matter in the source of form and nature. And actually, both of these are the same thing now. And actually, right from the beginning, from the infinity, that's our first triad, is infinity, male principle, female principle. That's the first triad. Okay? And infinity is the dividing line between these two things. And see, that's why there's always going to be challenges in male and female relationships, because we are archetypes of a universal principle, which are biologic counterparts of these universal principles, and we share all the attributes. And so between us, there is a little divide. And this divide is in the infinite expression of our consciousness according to our nature. Okay? But we're not meant for that divide to keep us in opposition, even though there is polarity here. This is the first polarity. And when you look at a magnet, and a common bar magnet, a square bar magnet, has a positive pole on one side and a negative pole on the other, right? You guys familiar with that? You know how you probably did this in high school, maybe elementary school, I don't know. You put the magnet under a sheet of paper and you sprinkle some iron filings on top of the paper, and it sorts out according to the field lines of the magnet. You get two spheres with radiating circles and little broadcasts off the ends, right? You've done that? You've looked at that? Oh, you haven't? You should do that. It's so much fun. Invisible energy shaping matter. It's really cool, okay? Okay, well, what most people don't realize is right in the middle, nothing's happening. There's actually a place on every magnet where there is no magnetic field. There's no magnetic field. A magnet is completely a magnet, except where the two fields come together. And there's actually a place, an actual place on every magnet that's neither positive nor negative. And that's called Bloch's wall. That's it. That's the electrical or engineering term for the space that actually occurs between the positive and the negative polarity. That is the transition space. That's where one thing becomes, through some mystical process, its complete opposite. Well, the only place where one thing can become its complete opposite is a place of power. It's a place where anything is possible. And so that is the infinity space in this first triad. And it never goes away. We always have that little place, that Bloch's wall, whatever's the equivalent of the Bloch's wall. A lot of people understand about polarity, and they won't hesitate. Oh, this is good, this is bad, this is positive, this is negative. There's polarity body work, there's polarity energy healing, there's polarity chakra balancing, there's polarity this and that. But really, there is no such thing as positive and negative if you don't consider the dividing line between the two, the gap or the space or the transition space between the two, where one becomes the other. In Chinese medicine, this first part of this chart is shown as the yin-yang symbol. Everybody's seen a yin-yang symbol, right? So you have a circle, and on one side you have a paisley fish that's dark, and on the other side, I know it's just what it reminds me of, you have a paisley fish that's light. And in classic symbols, there is a white dot in the black field, and there is a black dot in the white field. Okay? And everyone goes, oh, yin and yang, light and dark, positive, negative, male and female, inside and outside, this and that and the other, up and down, here and there. And they get the polarity. It seems pretty good. They got the polarity. What they forget is the eye plays a trick that the original creators of the symbol knew was going to happen. Eye plays a trick. When you look at a yin-yang symbol, I did this in class once before I had the discussion. I drew a yin-yang symbol on the board, and I asked everybody in class what it was and how many different things did it signify. And everybody in the class said 2. Night and day, yin and yang, male and female, hot and cold, and out, everybody did that. I said, oh, it's 2, lots of 2s, right? I said, no. There are 3 things clearly illustrated in the symbol. There is the yang principle, there is the yin principle, and there is a line between the 2. See, the line is invisible because one becomes the other, but there is a line there. And if you extended that line off the circle, you'd get it. Okay? You'd get it. And also in the symbols that have the light field in the dark, the dot, light dark, the dark, and a dark dot in the light field, the 3 is clearly illustrated. The purpose of that little dot of the opposite color in the big field, okay, is to show you that this is not a static symbol. It is an evolving symbol, and there is no yang without yin, and there is no yin without yang. There is no male without female. There is no female without male. There's no such thing as yang independent of yin. There's no such thing as male independent of female. That is analog thinking. It's analog thinking. And it's because the symbol's 2-dimensional. So we have the illusion of static. Although the artists were pretty good. That's why they make them swoop from small to big. And we say it's from lesser yang to brighter yang, and from lesser yin to brighter yin. And actually, a yin-yang symbol, if we were doing this lecture on Chinese medicine, I would then break up into 6 parts that are clearly illustrated on the yin-yang symbol. And you have to know that to know how meridians relate to yin and yang. Right? Okay. Same thing in Ayurveda. There is no male principle without the female. There is no female principle without the male. And both of them are defined by the infinity from which there is their origin and from which the third force will emanate, and which is the bridge for their action. In Chinese medicine, that place is called the interface. The interface. So it's the line between yin and yang is called the interface. And in Chinese language, it's Bia Li. That's the term for that line. Bia Li. And that's why yin yang is a symbol of three. Okay? Because something comes. First, we have the male principle without attributes, energy, formless, passive, pure existence. It's latent possibility, just the possibility of possibilities. And then you have the female principle, which is manifest, creative force, that with attributes, but no manifestation, no force, no direction. What happens when the two come together is everything that is becomes. Everything that is becomes, because now you have energy and matter and energy and endless revolving dance. But for the purpose of Ayurveda, what we're saying is the thing that comes into existence is the Mahat, which is the actual original, what the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi used to call the undifferentiated cosmic consciousness. I can't say it as funny as he did. But that's what he called it. He says when the male and the female principle and their primordial state, not in this life, in the primordial energetic realm, the realm of possibility. When possibility dances with concrescence, when possibility dances with manifestation, consciousness is born. Consciousness is born. And the first consciousness is undefiled. And it's not fractured or deformed. It's pure and clean. And it has an existence outside the limits of time and space. Because, of course, that is the first corrupting influence, is the distortions of time and space, or perceptions of time and space. It's the first distorting influence of consciousness. Of course, that only happens after we're born. So we have this undifferentiated cosmic consciousness. We have the conscious consciousness, and it has two primary qualities. The two primary qualities of the Mahat, or in Thai, the Buddhi consciousness, okay, are cognitive and non-cognitive. So cognitive is potential conscious faculty, and non-cognitive is potential materiality. All simultaneously occurring without any issues. Non-distinctive reality or oneness. That's the primordial conscious state. Okay. Now we have a dotted line across the chart. Okay, this is where the record is supposed to skip. Make the scratchy sound as the record skips. Because the undifferentiated cosmic consciousness chooses door number 3, and we are incorporated, we are incarnated, we are reiterated as a new consciousness into the world of material expression, of concreteness and limitation. And all of a sudden, the infinite consciousness of will and soul and spirit is encapsulated in a specific time, in a specific place, in a specific form, and it's a little bit traumatic. It's a little bit traumatic. And this first manifestation of consciousness into the world is called Ahankar. And it's the source of us. It's the source of all the I's. It is, in fact, the home of the ego. It is whatever says I am. Whatever within us has a distinctive identity. Remember, previous to being born, previous to being incarnated, we didn't have I am. We didn't have I am. We were non-distinctive, undifferentiated cosmic consciousness. After birth, we're stuck in the bubble, and we're condensed, and we're separated from everything else, in a way, not completely, but in a way. relatively isolated, so much so that we think that we are it. The world now is all about us. And that's I am, and that's ego, and that is the source of ego. Now, classic Ayurveda says that the ego, which is manifest when you're born, has three principal characters, and it has three principal defilements. So my professors were not politically correct. When we had these lessons in school, they referred to them as the three evils, the three egos, the three evils, the three pernicious influence, the three defilements, the three distortions of that which was perfect, but which is not perfect anymore. And the three fractures, or the three broken aspects. This is how my Ayurvedic professors referred to these things. They weren't politically correct. See, now it's not a lot of Ayurvedic books now. I have old Ayurvedic books that use evil in them when they speak of the doshas, or they speak of these three potential qualities here. Sattvas, rajas, tamas, followed by the doshas, which are their further materialization of these qualities. And they don't speak of them in positive terms, okay? And that's not classically the way they're referred to, because we were perfect before and we're less than perfect now. What is the nature of our imperfection? And now, how do we get back? So it's sort of like we chose to be here, like some kind of a group, some kind of a class experiment, and we were an infinitely diverse, infinitely connected entity of creation and consciousness with a life outside of time and space, and we were apparently bored. And so we came up with this idea of let's explore the limitations of self-reflective consciousness and the encapsulation, and let's explore isolation. We really all are all over infinity. So because we're godlike beings, we want to know all that there is about everything that's possible and potential, and the only thing that we didn't really know very well was isolation and independence and ego. And so we came up with this experiment, which we call life. And we all incarnated at the same time. Okay? So this is part of this idea that there's not many people, there's not many souls. You don't have a soulmate, for example, because if you want to say who's your soulmate, it's every human, every living sentient being on the face of the planet right at this minute. We're all part of the same experiment. And we set all these criteria that in order to make the game fair, okay, in order to make the game fair, when we incarnated ourselves, squeezed ourselves into the isolation tank called life, we took a pill, or however we did it, which gave us amnesia. And we said, at the moment of birth, we forget who we are. When you were born, you forget who you are. You forget where you come from. You forget what your possibility is as expression of consciousness in life. And you are a baby. And you're utterly and completely dependent on outside influences for your support, which is very different from the godlike being before incarnation, which had no need of support because there was nothing other than that to produce support. So we come into the experiment, we had other conditions on the experiment. Some of those other conditions was nobody gets out until everybody gets out. And now all the religions of the world try to handle this equation, this idea that nobody gets out till everybody gets out. And so they create all these ideas of afterlife and purgatory and bardo and all of these different things, which are about this idea that just because you die doesn't mean you're done. Because you're not done till everybody's done. Why? Because every other person, every other living sentient being is still on some level a reflection of your consciousness. One aspect of our group soul, our group consciousness. The Tibetans are particularly good at expressing this idea of the integrity of soul, of being, of all living things. They're particularly good at expressing it. So I Am emerges, here we are, we're the encapsulated God, spirit, undifferentiated cosmic consciousness, infinite being, of pure and undefiled expression of pure male and female, infinity of creation and light, and all possible potentials, and we're squashed down to a peanut. And that's us, and so we're born. And that peanut, which is us, the Ahamkar, has 3 different characteristics of ego. And those 3 characteristics are called the Sattvic principle, the Rajasic principle, and the Tamasic principle. And again, there's our deities again, which represent the archetypes of these principles. So you want to know what is the Sattvic principle, you read up and study Brahma. And you look at icons and symbols and pictures and images of Brahma and learn who was Brahma, what did Brahma do, what was Brahma's job. Okay? And that will tell you what did Brahma like, what did Brahma not like. Favorite hobbies, favorite food, walks at the beach, and that will tell you about the Sattvic principle. We also call the Sattvic principle the sun, the solar principle. Okay? Then we have on the right side of the chart here the Tamasic principle. This has 2 deities primarily, Mahesha and Durga. Durga sometimes called Kali. Durga sometimes called Kali. So you want to learn what is the female principle, what is the defilement, the female destructive principle. Kali the destroyer. Kali the destroyer. Okay? Utterly and completely necessary in life. All composting is a destructive process. The production of soil and humic elements and minerals that are then biologically available for living systems is a process of decomposition. So this is the Kali principle. This is the Tamasic principle. And it is absolutely vitally necessary for life in the physical realm. The sun principle, absolutely vital. Both of these are related. The composting, degenerative, deterioration, deconstructing principle of the Tamasic is not possible without the sun. Not possible without the sun. Not possible without the sun's energy. And then we look at the Rajasic principle. This is Vishnu. So there's your deity icon symbol for Rajasic principle. That's Vishnu. And also I mentioned the National Museum in Sukhothai, that one of the oldest bronze sculptures of Vishnu, one of the finest jewelry finished, amazing statues of Vishnu is in the National Museum in Sukhothai in northern Thailand. And it is of an unknown origin. Don't know where it was made. Don't know when it was made. But they found it. And it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. Okay? And it is older and is more of a stylized representation of Vishnu than any other known statue in India. So Indian people come from India every year by the busload to look at this statue of Vishnu, which is in northern Thailand. By the busload, they bus them in. They bus them in. And it's really beautiful. But you look at that, you want to know, what is Vishnu? Vishnu is the life force. Vishnu is prana. Vishnu is the air. Okay? Vishnu is the ether. The ground of being as it manifests in our world today. So we have to have all of these things. We have the life force, we have the solar principle, the male principle, we have the female principle. So we are in materiality the reverse but mirror image of the undifferentiated primordial cosmic consciousness. So we are encapsulated in ego, but we are still a perfect model of what came before, following the principle of as above, so below. And this chart models that principle. As above, so below. Okay? Now, each of these defilements, each of these three evil characteristics, okay, these self-limiting characteristics, okay, has further divisions and further expressions in materiality and in manifestation. So, for example, the solar, the sun, or the sattvic principle representing essence and potential has three tanmatras: the five sense faculties, the five motor organs, and the mind. Right? The five sense faculties, which we call organs of cognition, are ear, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose. So the body parts, ear, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose, actually represent sattvic quality. And imbalances that relate to the ear, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose are particularly sattvic. And how do I know that? Because that's what's on the chart. That's how I know, because that's the correlation, the traditional correlation. Now, also, sattvic are the five motor organs, which we call organs of action. So far we got organs of cognition. Now, what's an organ of cognition? Well, what is cognition? Okay, to cognate. Cog. Think noggin. You say coggin. Think noggin. Cognition means it is the process wherein we take an information from our environment, note it, Julie noted. We take an information from our environment, make note of it, and then we compare and contrast that information with memory. Okay? Compare and contrast current experience with memory, and then we arrive at various processes of deduction. Okay? It's a process of cognition. So the source of cognitive faculty is actually the eyes, skin, ear, skin, eyes, tongue, and nose. So what do we call those also? The sense faculties, right? The sense organs. So without these, we're just a ball of goo as far as our understanding of the word. Without these functioning, we're just a ball of goo. In fact, so they are the interface between the external reality and the internal reality. They are how the external reality gets inside, and they are also part of how our inner reality gets outside. Okay, so they're interface. That's what they stand for. Now, we have the five motor organs, the organs of action. Mouth, hands, feet, reproductory organs, and excretory organs. Okay? The organs of actions are how we implement our consciousness in the real world. In other words, how we extend and affect the world with our inner consciousness. That's what they're for. So we can eat, we can reach, we can run, we can reproduce, and we can evacuate. So we can take in and we can let go. We can grab and we can throw. We can basically interact. So these are the tools that consciousness uses to interact in the environment that it exists in. Now what's interesting is it's also a sattvic quality is the mind, which is both an organ of action and cognition. Now the first thing I want you to notice about the mind is that in Ayurveda, the mind is not special. In fact, it's no different than the excretory organ. In fact, sometimes the mind acts as an excretory organ. The mind is no different than any of the other organs of action or organs of cognition. And so in that respect, it's not special, it's not superior, and there's nowhere in Ayurveda where it says the mind or the brain is in charge. Not that I've seen. If you know a reference, please, get back to me. Give me a reference. If you know a place in some ancient Ayurvedic text or some translated text where it says the brain is in charge, I'd be really happy to learn that or to see that, just to throw it into the mix. Because so far, all I've seen is the brain is no more of a significant organ than your mouth or your penis, or your vagina, or your tongue, or your nose, and so on and so forth. And its function is like all of the other organs of cognition or action. It's either to act as an interface, to take in information, or to direct external action. But it's not necessarily where consciousness resides. It's not necessary. See, consciousness is not contained in your brain. Okay? And we now have lots of science that supports this understanding. Okay? Now let's look on the right side, and Thomas has the equivalent of tanmatras, but they have a different name. They're called bhutas. And the bhutas are sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. And sound is the guna of ether. The term is akash. Touch is the guna of air, vayu. Sight is the guna of fire, tejo. Taste is the guna of water, apo. And smell is the guna of earth, or patavi, or prithvi, depending on how you say it. Now, those are also ether, air, fire, water, and earth, of course, are what we now know as the principal elements in Ayurveda. So those are the 5 elements. But notice that before the 5 elements, we have the sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell. So the way that we interact with the 5 elements, the Ayurvedic elements, or the Tatamsi, which is the 4 Thai elements, is using our senses. And also notice that at the very bottom we have Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, okay? And Vata, Pitta, and Kapha don't exist in and of themselves. There's no such thing. Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, or the Tridosha, are composites of 2 elements. Each one is a composite of 2 elements. So all of the doshas are derivative of the defilement of the tamasic, lunar, or kaphic, or kali expression of ego. And that's why body types are not necessarily a positive thing. And also, they represent, in imbalance, forms of deterioration. They actually represent that deterioration faculty of Kali. In other words, they're why we are composting, because we have doshas. We will eventually die. We will eventually become food for the worms. We will deteriorate because it is the nature of our manifestation in the shell, which is ruled by the female, okay, to deteriorate and to compost and to become food for worms, just like I said. But we have other qualities. So the Rajasic quality is kinetic protective force, represents movement and action and really the vital life force, okay? If anything, that is our hope. That's why we're not completely limited. Even though we're born in a finite shell, in a shell which literally begins to deteriorate at the moment of birth in some way or fashion, but we have hope. And the hope is by using information that comes to us through our cognitive faculties, if we can generate, if we can store, if we can accumulate more life force, then the possibility of our expression of nature changes. There's this possibility of change. It doesn't say guarantee, it says possibility. All right? And at the very last, we have the 2 worlds of the organic. That's the sattvic world is the organic, and the tamasic world is the inorganic. And the dividing line, of course, really is movement, isn't it? You know, you think of the inorganic world versus the organic world. What are the primary characteristics of the mineral world? It moves way slower than the organic world. In other words, it's kinetic force, it's inclination to move, it's inclination toward movement. That's the traditional Vedic way of separating living things from the mineral world and the crystal world. The crystal world also moves, but kind of slow compared to its organic counterpart. Crystals are alive. Crystals grow. Crystals have organization. They have an organized life. They only occur at very specialized places. They have to have the right conditions, and they have to have the right support for the right amount of time. And then they grow, and they have a life. Apparently, they have friends. Okay, they just do it a lot slower than we do. Okay. All right. Before I go one step further with this, are there any questions or comments about the Samkhya creation principles, or anything that popped up or came to mind for you while I was speaking?
The numbering, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Speak up.
The numbering with the cosmos and the principle of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
Yes.
and 7. So as that comes down the Ahamkar, would that be the 4? And does that move on 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that? Is that what it is referring here?
Well, it refers to each one of those numbers represents a law or a hierarchy of creation and or an interaction. So law of 3 is the male-female reconciling force, or the sattvic, rajasic, tamasic. 4 is ego plus these qualities. In other words, ego with sense faculties, ego with motor organs, ego with mind, ego affecting or interacting with elements. See, that gives us 4. So we still have ego as part of the picture. It didn't go away. Okay? And then there are other 4s also. Okay? 5 are the 5 elements. Okay? I'll skip over to 7. 7, for example, is like this, the ray of creation. 7 colors in the rainbow. In the first chakra, the oldest representation of the first chakra is a symbol. The center of first chakra is actually an elephant with 7 trunks. It's actually an elephant with 7 trunks. Usually people don't show all the depictions of all the traditional characteristics that were in the icons of the chakras, so we don't know what we don't see. But in these older symbols, the center of first chakra, Muladhara chakra, is actually an elephant with 7 trunks. And that is the 7 chakras, that is the 5 elements, plus 2 other qualities, and there are different ways to do it, but that's how the numbers are generated, okay? And you see them over and over again, and you see them used against themselves and multiplied and divided by themselves to come up with other numbers, like the number of mala beads on a japa malas. Why are there 108? Why not 107? Why not 104? Why not 109? Why are there 108? Well, it's because of the numerology. Okay, and there are other principles that come into these numbers, which are numerology principles.